Alrighty then. Here is the explanation of the reason that it actually takes at least 15 minutes to do the conversion for housings between SG and GP RideWatches. And you're wondering, are they not supposed to rotate? That is correct. Where you see, I already have SG 5s disassembled on Chaser's housing. I've already done the rotation mod to get the fronts to spin. Of course, it looks like I don't know what I'm doing because I'm using the camera to see, but the other reason you have to do that, you basically have to do this mod if you're switching houses between SG and GP, is that the housing distances, for whatever reason, on GP and SG, the distance between here and here, you can probably see it on camera, this is actually, for whatever reason, they use slightly different housings. Like on the GP housing for Chaser over there, or the GP housing for SG5s, which I put on Chaser, this hole is actually further up. So you have to end up trimming these down in order to get them to fit. And so you've basically done the rotation mod anyway. So there's that. The other thing about switching housings, well, there are actually two things, but I'm only going to fully show one, is that this board is for FIs, and I didn't bother desoldering because this piece is actually close enough that you can just jam it in there. I actually ended up breaking this part for FIs, but between this screw and this peg, it's going to be fine. And this housing. But here, you'll notice I had to trim, because there are mounting holes for the motherboard. This is a motherboard. You heard me talking about boards and Discord, that's what I meant. This is a motherboard. There's the chip under the epoxy there. And these two holes usually go into these two pegs. But because this was meant for Chaser, and this is the FIs board, the holes do not actually, as I destroy the board, do not actually line up. Because you can tell where it's supposed to be with this rail and this rail. And for Chaser, there's actually a cutout notch to accommodate this part of the housing, instead of just cut away the housing. But as you can see, there are no pegs for these holes anymore, because I had to trim them off, otherwise the board would float, and it was actually giving me problems. Thank you, battery low. It was actually giving me problems with the reset button, because it wasn't sitting quite right. So I don't even know if you can see that anymore, but yeah, that takes about 15 minutes. And the other thing, thank you, battery being low, see if I can turn it back on, no, is that, I don't know if you can tell, but for the GP, they have them as like half moon shapes, but they're at an angle. For the SG stuff, it's actually half moon shapes, but orthogonally, which is like at right angles to each other. So I had to trim down the pin boards for that. That's it, really.